Let's bring in Middle East analyst Micah Halpern. We're also joined here by Thane Rosenbaum, distinguished fellow at the NYU Law School. Welcome to you both. Thane, let's start with a video that the United States has released. It shows an Iranian patrol boat removing a mine that exploded on the oil tanker. And it's hard to believe that this Iranian boat was simply passing by, by coincidence.
You mean like fishing?
Like fishing, right? They probably, wanted to get there before other forces, like, let's say, Americans would have gotten there and maybe saw that this mine carries some Iranian hallmarks. But my question is it a good enough proof to say that Iran is behind it?
Well, that is an interesting question, except that, motive always matters in the law, and especially under international law. Who else would want to do this? Who else stands to benefit from causing economic hardship, at least in the spike of oil prices in the aftermath of the end of the Iran deal and the replacing of sanctions? So I think that that's sort of the general consensus, that it could only be them. Also, Tal, it required a certain level of operational and intelligence capacity. This is not just something anyone could do. A state actor needed to do it. And it does seem that the only legitimate state actor who would care to do this would be Iran.
Not if you ask Mohammad Javad Zarif, the Iranian foreign minister. He blames the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Israel of trying to sabotage the talks between Iran and Shinzo Abe, the Japanese prime minister. And he calls this attack suspicious because it coincided with this visit of the Japanese prime minister to Tehran. And this was a Japanese-owned oil tanker. But if somebody really wanted to frame Iran, they wouldn't have chosen such a suspicious target, no?
Well, there are multiple ways of looking at it. The first and most important is to realize that Iran actually is rated the fourth best navy in the world. And one of the reasons it is because of these tiny ships, the tiny vessels, the rubber ones and the other ones that we saw just now. They're so good that literally and truly, just a few years ago, in 2016, the United States naval sailors were actually captured by these very ships, these tiny little vessels, and held captive for a good amount of time until they were released. They didn't even know they were coming. In other words, they came right from underneath their noses. They're so good that they're almost not detectable on radar. They swarm, arrive, and leave. They are experts at specifically putting mines on ships. They've done this a lot, and that's probably one of the other reasons, or one of the other proofs, actually, that it was the Iranians. There are other people that gain from this, you should know, and there are people that gain from framing Iran, but that we're not necessarily talking about.
So if Iran or Iranian proxies are behind these attacks, what they're trying to do is obviously try to put pressure on the U.S. and show, as if to say, this is the tension, this is the kind of crisis that U.S. sanctions are causing. Look at what's happening in the Gulf. But President Trump, what he's doing is to show them that this strategy won't pay off, because now he's walking back his previous statements and he's saying we're not even ready for talks with Iran. What do you think about the White House strategy?
Tal, we've been in a Cold War with Iran since the beginning of the Islamic Revolution, the taking of American hostages. It was only during the 8 years of the Obama administration there was an ongoing effort to be conciliatory with Iran, to the point of even alienating Israel and Saudi Arabia. But yes, it's clear that tensions have escalated with the Trump administration, but that's mainly because he ran. Remember, this is a man who feels very strongly that if he makes campaign promises, that he's going to actually carry them out. And he said, I'm going to decertify the Iran deal, the worst deal ever made. So, and then, he's brought in people like Bolton, who have always been Iran hawks. And so, yes, you can well understand that there is escalating tensions, not just in the region, but with the United States. Remember, though, Iran they may be a strong naval capacity, with Micah says, but this is not a major army. They're much better at mischief than anything else. And we see this regional mischief in Yemen, Syria, and Lebanon. What the United States and Israel is worried about with Iran is nuclear weapons. It's not anything else.
But I want to talk about anything else because there are other things happening there. The Houthis in Yemen, which are Iranian-backed forces, they attacked for the second time in 2 days an airport in the south of Saudi Arabia. They even conquered certain very small territories there, but it's the first time and it happened over the last week. Can we really separate what the Houthis are doing from, the religious war between Iran and Saudi Arabia from the nuclear issue, Michal?
No, it's very important to realize the Iran has worked for several centuries, when they were Persia even, to recognize that they used proxies instead of themselves. And so one of the things is they are the Shiite font for the entire Muslim world. There are only about 15% of the Muslim world that are Shiites, but they are the resident capital of that, which means anyone who wants to engage in that kind of world needs to come through Iran. And they function as that, both in terms of, we think of it as religion as Westerners, but it's not really, it's much more than that. It's an entire culture. They are the font of Shiite dominion, and it's important to recognize that.
Thane, briefly.
I just think that their interest is regional power. That's why they're in Yemen, that's why they're in Lebanon, and that's why they're in Syria. This is the one thing that even Russia is concerned about, right? Because everyone sees that what Iran is ultimately trying to do. This is what Netanyahu has been talking about, the various ways in which there's a promiscuous foreign policy that Iran has engaged in.
And that was Trump's response, actually. Trump was responding to Iran today when he said, we don't want to talk to them, because they said they don't want to talk to us.
We'll continue to talk about the region. Micah Halpern and Thane Rosenbaum, stick with us. Now let's bring in our panel to discuss. Micah Halpern and Thane Rosenbaum. Micah, we were wondering here on i24 News if we're going to see another round of escalation before the September vote in Israel, before the elections. And I guess over the last 2 days, we got the answer. The rockets are back. And now the question is, does it stop here, as Jonathan Regev raises the question, or should we expect to see more violence, especially around the Bahrain summit, maybe?
Well, you can always look at history, and history actually sort of proves that the summertime is the time when these things actually increase. So tensions increase. It's also sort of inappropriate to suggest that maybe there's a calm, because there's always a rise in the fall, and it depends on a lot of different issues. Let's say it's been a fall recently because the end of Ramadan and Eid al-Fitr, for the last 2 weeks they didn't have anything. So as a result, even 6,000 coming out, which is a very small number to the border with Gaza and Israel, is a significant change from nothing from last week and the week before.
Thane, we saw the images from last night, that direct hit on the yeshiva in Sderot. That could have been much worse, and luckily nobody was injured, nobody was there. The Israeli public, I follow many Israelis on social media, and I see that they're urging the government to do more and stop the violence from Gaza. But Prime Minister Netanyahu is, taking this approach of containing the conflict, of managing it. I'm not sure that's what the Israeli public wants to see from what I'm reading. How could it play out during elections? Well, security issue. Is it a big deal now?
Well, it's hard to underestimate how in the Israeli psyche it means when Hamas's rockets actually hit something. The Israelis are just used to having 600,000 rockets, 10,000 rockets being fired at them, and either they land nowhere or Iron Dome air defense batteries knock them out. What we're seeing in the last 5-6 months is we're actually seeing Hamas rockets without any special guided GPS technology hitting things. And that's why you're seeing Israelis acting in the spirit of Avigdor Lieberman, who were saying since 2014, finish the job.
Hamas should be defeated.
Get them out of there. We should have never left them with rockets. We should have never let them with terror tunnels, and we're bearing the cost of that now.
So speaking of Lieberman, he's doing well in the polls before elections. It's starting to look like the political landscape in Israel will change a lot from the April vote to the September vote. Today, it was reported that former Prime Minister Ehud Barak is reportedly considering an independent run. Ayelet Shaked, she might be leading some merge of right-wing parties. The name of Tzipi Livni has been brought up again and again. A lot to digest there, but also a lot of concern for Prime Minister Netanyahu, right?
There's no question. The first is that there's not a prime minister in Israel that has been made or will be made who will enter into an election period by entering into a war. They can't possibly put that the deaths of Israeli soldiers on their platform. It's just not going to happen. So the most important thing to do between now and the election is to stabilize. There's no question about that. The second thing, which is important to recognize, is that Ehud Barak can't run from a labor point of view because there's no such thing as labor anymore. They're almost non-existent. So there's no way he could stand as a labor candidate. So he has to come as a different one. The arena that we're seeing, and it really is an arena, it's not necessarily a platform, their arena, the fighting arena that we're going to see is going to change dramatically in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Who's in and who's out?
In 2 sentences?
I think this is worse for Gantz than it is for Netanyahu. I think it's much
point
worse
of
for
view.
him because, you know, now you have more rock stars who are in the actual election. A former prime minister is there.
With experience.
With experience, and a wartime prime minister. Somebody who has his own experiences with the military. And so, yes.
Great points, as always. Thane Rosenbaum and Micah Halpern, thank you. We'll have you again soon to discuss all of this.